In this episode, we'll be looking at Omar Bradley. Omar Bradley would command the largest American field army of the Second World War. In many respects, he is now overshadowed by some of his more flamboyant contemporaries, such as George Patton. Born in 1893 in Missouri and accepted into the military academy at West Point in 1911, his graduation year would be known as the class the stars fell on, due to so many graduates earning their general stars. He didn't see action in Europe during the First World War, and during the interwar years promotion was slow. He held a series of training posts where he met George C. Marshall, who, later, as Chief of Staff, masterminded the American Army's war effort during World War II. Marshall was reputed to have kept a little black book where he noted promising officers. Presumably, Bradley was in it. With the outbreak of war and Marshall's promotion, Bradley jumped from Lieutenant Colonel to Brigadier General. First in North Africa, then in Sicily, Bradley proved to be reliable. His next posting was to command American ground forces for the invasion of Europe. On D-Day, commanding the 1st Army, then 12th Army Group when it activated. 12th Army Group would take part in some of the toughest fighting of the war. The Falaise Pocket, the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, part of the Siegfried Line campaign, would be one of the most costly actions fought by the American Army. His men took the initial brunt during the Battle of the Bulge, and in the closing months of the war, 1st Army would capture the bridge at Remagen over the Rhine, 2 weeks before Field Marshal Montgomery's set piece to cross the Rhine, Operation Plunder. Immediately after the war, he headed the Veterans Association in the key years as the Army was being demobilised. He then served as Army Chief of Staff, followed by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, through to his retirement from the military in 1953. Joining me to discuss Bradley is Jeffery Lavoie. Jeffrey's new book, The Private Life of General Omar N. Bradley, re-examines the man, focusing on his private life. Thank you for joining me, Jeffrey. So, why did you decide to look at Omar Bradley?
So I discovered on eBay, of all places, a diary, or kind of what I thought was a diary of his second wife, Kitty Bueller. And it was for sale. I think it was like under $100. It was a hand or a typed manuscript that they thought was part of Bradley's, general life's writing and all of that. So I bought it, just trying to figure out that the contents didn't match up with the contents I had for a general's life. And when I received it, it was actually a book proposal Kitty Bueller had put together of a tell-all book about the general's life and their time together. So I thought I stumbled across a jewel. So I kind of wanted to get that out to the public, in a coherent way. So the chapters weren't fully written. It was probably about a 3-page synopsis on each chapter of their life together. You learn some very fascinating things about someone who there's not a lot of information about his personal life.
He is a very overlooked person for the amount of authority that he had.
Absolutely. So I naturally thought it wasn't, I thought it was going to be, I didn't think it was going to be anything special because of the obvious nature. I mean, this guy's a 5-star general. I mean, who would sell it for so cheap? And they didn't know what they had. And
she clearly must not have sold it. I wonder why she was turned down.
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know. I know there was this kind of mythology that once he passed away, the Department of Defense came and took his papers and kind of weeded out everything and kind of left her with what was left, which is interesting to think about it. That's just a rumor, but so conspiracy theories can abound in that.
Incredible. Shall we start at the beginning with him?
Yeah, please, yeah.
I mean, how much do we know about his childhood? He was from farming stock, wasn't he? And his father was self-educated, became a school teacher.
Yes, it seemed to be very, very happy. He speaks highly of it in later years. He speaks very highly of his father and his desire for books and his discipline, I think, kind of carried over to Omar as well. He gives little anecdotes in his book and also his unpublished writings at West Point that just kind of little stories of him hunting with his father was a big thing, and they would walk to school, and just very positive, very positive childhood, it seems. Yeah.
He isn't from a military family. though the Civil War was still within living memory and both his grandfathers served.
Yes, that's interesting.
Interestingly, on opposite sides from one another. Why did he apply to the military academy at West Point?
Honestly, I think it came down to cost. I think someone at church, a Sunday school teacher, suggested he try for West Point. He said he wasn't sure if he'd be able to pay the fees, but when you get into West Point, you don't have to pay fees. It's just kind of, there's no cost associated with it. There may be some, but not in terms of tuition. He took the test, the entrance exam, and he took it the same day as Eisenhower did, which is interesting. They were both in the presumably same room taking the test.
How was his time at West Point?
He obviously went through a lot of hazing back then, which was very common. They would, for example, when you were sleeping, they would kind of drag you out in your bed and put you sometimes in the middle of the road without knowing it while you were sleeping. And spigoting, they would take you and put you under a water fountain, or water hose rather. And from what I understand, Bradley was a fast runner, so he would run away from the boys and he would climb a tree when they went after him so he could avoid it. He also didn't sleep on the mattresses the way they did. He slept on the floor, which made it more difficult to drag him out for the hazing there, which I think is interesting.
He was also athletic, wasn't he? He was in the baseball and football teams?
Yes, specifically baseball as well. He was very gifted at that. He tells a story in his book. I'm not sure where. He played on minor league teams, as I'm sure you know, in Missouri, where he was from. He just played with no pay just because he enjoyed doing it when he was not at West Point for the summers, I believe.
He graduated in 1915, and this is the year that was known as the class the stars fell on. It produced 59 generals, including Eisenhower and Bradley, yet neither passed out at the top of their year. Out of 164, Ike was only 64th and Bradley was 44th. What can we say about their, on the surface, unremarkable class ranking?
So this would be the 100-year anniversary then this year.
Yes, it would.
Which is a landmark, I think. I think people saw leadership in Omar Bradley, but I don't think anyone knew he would go as far as he did. I think today, looking back, people are still surprised he went as far as he did.
Bradley left. He went to West Point because for a cheaper education. Why did he choose to enter the military? I mean, he was turned down for the engineers and the artillery, which are usually favoured by the more educational types, I believe, but was accepted to the infantry. I mean, it was pretty, one would have thought, with war in Europe, there was an ongoing dispute on the borders of Mexico. If you were joining the army, certainly the infantry, you were going to see active service. Do you think this was something that had appealed to him, or he just joined the infantry because it was the next thing you did?
According to his memoirs, he says he wanted to fight in World War I and wanted to see combat and the opportunity to defend America. How true that is, I don't know. It's always easy to look back and say that. He didn't seem to be afraid of it, though he did meet Mary at that time, his first wife. And so I guess it's tough to really know, what he was thinking. I think probably part of both, both and in this case, perhaps.
Well, I guess the other thing it offers is regular employment.
Yeah, and certainly that he speaks of finances throughout his book, A General's Life, talking about that when the economic downfalls and the Great Depression didn't really affect him as much because of the different benefits he received. So certainly that was in his mind. He was always talking about money, which is interesting when you look at some of the jobs he took, even while out of West Point there. He worked on a bridge building crew. I don't know if you familiar with that.
No.
He tells a near-death experience. He was up there and all of a sudden a wire snapped and it hit like literally 2 feet away from him. And he said that was the last day he decided to build bridges. And that was, can you imagine if it did happen, what the war would have been like?
And this was whilst he was still a student at West Point?
I believe so. I believe it was.
Incredible.
Just the different jobs he took, to supplement his income. So it was always an issue up until the later years, I'm sure.
That's interesting. I didn't realise that. He is, of course, well known for wearing army issue uniform rather than getting them tailor-made, which perhaps suggests some kind of frugality.
Could have been because of the way he was brought up, with his father and all that, I'm sure played into that.
You mentioned Mary Quayle. They were married quite young. He met her before he went to West Point, I think, didn't he?
They lived across the street from each other, back in Missouri, which is interesting.
And they were married until, I presume, happily until her death. Was it a happy marriage? Do we know?
Yeah. In this journal of Kitty Bueller, Omar Bradley's a hero. He was certainly a patriot, a very bold leader and a very incredible leader. But he was he liked the ladies, I guess is a way to put it. Him and Kitty had an ongoing affair while he was married with Mary.
He met Kitty while he was post-war, but before he retired from the military, I think, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He actually, the first time she met him was at a press conference because she was a reporter, and she had seen him come off the plane and had just interviewed him, and that's kind of how they met initially. And then they met again in the Delray racetrack some years later, and that's when I think they started this ongoing relationship that they had, which is interesting. In its own self, you have a man who's very by the rules, very orderly, a great leader, yet he struggles with his own humanity. To me, he's a very realistic type of hero, to look up to.
Was it an open secret, or was it completely clandestine at the time?
I don't think most people are aware of that, even up to this point, and that's why I decided when I read that in this book proposal that I had from Kitty, I just thought the world deserved to know a little bit more about his personal struggles and his personal life. She also implies in her proposal that he had an affair with Marlene Dietrich, which is a whole other thing that I actually explore in my book to a little more detail.
And how far did you get with that?
Just they were in the war together. She was in the USO, and they had several opportunities, we'll say, to connect with each other. She doesn't use her name specifically, but I think what she says, she says, I'll tell you something about the German actress with the sultry lips and legs. And it's known that Omar and Marlene spent some time together. And then Kitty said this: each of them before my time, but in her own time, had contributed to Omar's knowledge and well-being. Once one of Omar's ex-mistresses and I lunched at the Four Seasons in New York. And then she goes on about that very briefly, but it certainly implies that.
Yeah, that's quite incredible. That's a great story.
Yeah, it's fascinating because she's such a major icon, and so was he. I think he's kind of falling out of collective memory, but he was really, he was really an important figure. It was almost like celebrities and war heroes went together back then. Hollywood and the government were.
Possibly at the end of a major conflict, some of the military leaders move into politics. I'm thinking of Ulysses S. Grant or Eisenhower. Capable leaders that war makes a celebrity or find that they can win votes, whereas normally they would not be part of the political establishment. I guess it's easier to sell themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something Omar really struggled with. He didn't want to do that, sell himself. Unlike Patton, who was very shy about that.
Well, should we talk about Patton? He was posted to Hawaii in 1926, where he met Patton for the first time. And then, strangely, the two of them seem to have crisscrossed one way or another over the years. Patton was superior in rank when they first met, and he's from a very different background. How did the two initially get on?
So, you have two sides. You have Patton's side, and then you have Bradley's side. They seem to disagree quite a bit. So Patton was kind of like, Omar was a good leader, but it's because I helped him. That's kind of my paraphrase, if you will. I kind of guided him, and he did it, and he kind of just stood out of the way and all of that. I think, from what I understand, Bradley speaks pretty highly of Patton. He does imply that he's sometimes a little reckless at times, or doesn't count the cost. I think Patton could just kind of typified the American military attitude. Let's get in there and let's do it. And I think that he was very charismatic and all of that. So who actually, their actual relationship, I'm not sure. Based on that, it's kind of conflicting. And it's still, people are talking about it to this day. Have you heard of S.L.A. Mathers?
You mean S.L.A. Marshall, the American combat historian?
Yes, yes. He wrote this thing against Bradley that he was, that Carlo d'Este and all the World War II researchers love to quote, that kind of makes Bradley look inferior, if you will.
Would that be, he was played up by Ernie Pyle. The GIs were not impressed with him, and they scarcely knew him. He's not a flamboyant figure, and he didn't get out much to troops. And the idea that he was idolised by the average soldier is just rot.
Yes, and that is taken out of a much bigger context, which is fascinating. I found this in the World War II archive in Pennsylvania, the barracks, Carlisle, Pennsylvania, but they left out a big part of it. Would you like me to read that to you?
Sure.
So this is kind of in between. He didn't make that much of an imprint, talking about Bradley. For instance, the imprinting couldn't compare with Patton's on the minds of the troops. I say my relations with him were extraordinary. He did me countless favors. Whenever I asked him to do anything, he was more than gracious and willing, and he figured prominently into several of my key moves. It was his steering of this through his staff and their prompt return to us that made us feel at least that we had free way and that we could operate. So that's kind of the positive side that's left out of this famous quote that people love to say. And in my opinion, it's kind of making it one-sided.
I mean, I'd sort of made a note of that, but I'd also lumped with it Montgomery's criticism of Bradley for being dull, conscientious, dependable, and loyal. And
yes.
and that again is this. It's a funny one.
Similar.
Because yes, it is, but at the same time, it's dependable and loyal and conscientious. Well, you could certainly dull and conscientious. Some people would probably say that about Montgomery. I'm not sure how dependable and loyal Montgomery was, so I found the quote regarding Bradley possibly be more applicable to himself.
Yes.
I thought dull, conscientious, dependable and loyal actually summed Bradley up quite well.
Yes. Yeah.
But there again, that could it could easily, you could have changed the word Bradley and put Eisenhower.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of to their personality trait.
I think it's interesting that George C. Marshall, the future Chief of Staff during the Second World War, writing about his First World War experiences in the 1920s, noted what he thought was essential for a general. They had to have good common sense, professionally educated, physically strong, cheerful and optimistic, energetic, extremely loyal and determined. In some respects, that's not far from Montgomery's criticism. Would you say that these are traits that summed Bradley up?
He was a strong leader from what I understand, but definitely loyal. You know, he had to replace, and he's obviously criticized for this, replacing men too quickly and all of that, but I don't see that myself, you know, because men didn't perform the way he asked them to, but I think that was more a leadership. I mean, he was trying to find leaders and raise people up who could lead effectively.
I wonder if some of that came from George Marshall. He'd met Marshall when he was sent to Fort Benning as a weapons instructor in the 1930s, and Marshall was assistant commandant. Marshall was certainly known for firing people. When he came Chief of Staff, he cleared out a lot of dead wood. I wonder how much of an influence Marshall was on Bradley.
Definitely think Bradley would consider him a mentor. So, yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. What you're saying, I'm sorry, just putting the pieces together, yeah, I think definitely. When was that article written, did you say? In the 20s?
The 20s, yeah.
Typical for a World War II leader to think that the ideals of a leader are the ones they possess, but of any leader for that matter.
When the war broke out, he had a meteoric rise from lieutenant colonel to brigadier general in one jump. He was posted to Fort Benning to command the infantry school, where he rolled out the officer command school program for the 90-day wonders.
Certainly, this was kind of I think this was one of his crowning achievements myself, if I were asked one of the...
How did he go about it? I mean, he'd spent 16 years, up until about 1938, I think, in either teaching or being taught in military education establishments. I mean, so presumably that would have been good grounding for him setting up these 90-day courses. I mean, he got a lot of flack for them as well. He got a lot of criticism for it. But what was his approach?
Yeah, well, I think it was more he valued them, made them seem important. I mean, more so, I guess, when they to the new recruits as they were handling that, he kind of made them seem as individuals. You know, he didn't coddle them. He was tough on them, but I think in an intelligent, he says, an intelligent, humane, and understanding way. You know, they were given a meal when they came on. They were in pre-assigned units. He had a brass band play for them. So I think he kind of developed an individualism, which is still found. I mean, remember in the States, there's the slogan for the Army, an army of one. That's still, I think that came from Omar Bradley, that he valued the individual instead of looking at it from you know, obviously their role was in this bigger picture, but he still valued their individualism. Little touches of home, I think, is what he called them. So I think that was a big part of his leadership training class as well, in the officer training, rather. And also, I think physical fitness was another point of emphasis for him. He had them do an obstacle course and different things like that. One that he would run for up till his, I believe, early 50s or late 40s. He would run it, and he tells the story of one time he was running it because he did it along with his men. That was, I'm sure you know, his style of leadership. When he had his men run, he ran with them. He was just very much led by example. But he's running through this obstacle course, and he fell into a vat of sewage, we'll say. And everyone got a kick out of that because here's this officer who's covered in waste, we'll say. So I think that's another thing. He was not, again, his approach to training was that he wasn't afraid to get in there with them. He wasn't above them, unlike, well, I won't name names, but other officers of the time.
When after that he had another short training position, but then he was sent to North Africa, and I think Eisenhower had requested him. Had their paths crossed much between their days at West Point? I mean, they must have known one another at West Point. I don't know how much their careers had crossed paths.
Yeah, I'm not sure up to that point how much or how well they knew each other. I know when he received the call, he knew that Ike was in Africa, and they said, you're going to be, something to the effect, you're going to be joining Ike soon. And that's how he knew where he was going, because they weren't allowed to say locations, obviously, over lines. So there was that knowledge of him, but to what level,
he was sent out after the debacle of the Kesserine Pass.
Yes.
Where the Americans were blooded, the commanding officer was fired, and Patton was brought in temporarily to replace him, who requested Brad as his number two. Mm. And how was their working relationship in a combat zone?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to play out. I mean, because from that point on, they were. I think at first, well, I mean, Bradley says this. He kind of rubbed him the wrong way. Patton did in his style. But they kind of became closer as time went on.
Do you think Bradley picked anything up off Patton? I mean, from everything you read, Patton was born to lead in war, which is not necessarily what you might think when you look at Bradley.
That's being kind. Yeah.
Do you think Bradley picked anything up from his experiences working under Patton?
You know, I've never really thought about that, but how could they not? Right? You have two leaders together, very different styles, but I mean, I think that's how anybody grows in their position, right? You have someone who suggests things that you wouldn't think of, and you initially reject them, but then you think on them, and it helps you to kind of see another perspective and grow, and on both sides, even, I would say.
I find the whole Patton thing, what I can't get over is for two men to crisscross and somehow appear to be chalk and cheese, yet somehow not at the same time not be hand in glove with one another as men individual from the situation that they're in, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And that's and when I was going through it all, this whole Patton Bradley thing, they're almost synonymous with one another.
No, they are. I mean, they're like, they're kind of a dynamic duo. I mean, they are. They worked well. Like Patton balanced Omar out, and Omar balanced Patton out in many ways.
But you can never quite put down who's Batman to who's Robin.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. I mean, if you ask Patton, he was, and if you ask Bradley, he was, and You ask Ike, who knows? Depends on the situation, yeah.
Eisenhower, Marshall, and Bradley all seem to fit. Patton is very much the odd man out, and the whole dynamic is just it's bizarre.
Yeah, no, it is, and I don't have any more insight on in terms of that, but it is a very fascinating. I can't put my finger on it either. I guess that would be my.
After North Africa, he was once more under Patton in Sicily, and it's here that Ernie Pyle was prodded to go and so-called discover Bradley, and he dubbed him the Soldier's General. He wrote what I thought was a lovely statement saying, if I could pick any two men in the world for my father except my own dad, I would pick Omar Bradley or General Eisenhower. I mean, how did he feel about these titles? How was his relationship with the press? He's not known for being, exuberant and self-promoting.
No, absolutely not. And I mean, I think it was very awkward for him. In fact, his right-hand man had to talk him into talking to the press. He had to show him the value in it because Omar wasn't interested. He wasn't there. He wasn't a showboat like Patton was. I was very reserved. Probably came from his strong Christian upbringing. You don't sell yourself, as we talked about, probably to an extreme conservative view. But yeah, he was very much didn't like the limelight. In fact, I think today that kind of makes him more of a target for researchers because he wasn't self-seeking. He didn't push for it. It kind of found him, if you want to think of it like that. But he said he would do interviews as long as it encouraged his men. So that was his goal in doing that. That's what he said anyways. But his kind of actions defend that belief, I believe, that he did it because he thought if it put his men at ease, he was going to do it.
There were at times strained relations between the British and Americans. Then we have Montgomery pressing for higher command for himself and pushing his views.
Yes, yeah.
But how did Bradley cope with the British? I mean, certainly during the Battle of the Bulge, and by this time Bradley was commanding 21st Army Group, part of his command was handed temporarily to Montgomery, who then seemed to take the lion's share of the credit for stabilising the situation. Like Patton, Montgomery was another strong character that Bradley had to have a working relationship with.
Yeah, I think he struggled with that, which was tough. It's said that the only time he ever lost his temper was due to Montgomery, which is interesting in of itself. He was known kind of as the quiet general. So I think it's obviously humiliating to lose your guys for whatever reason it may be. I think he was more timid than Montgomery as well. Yeah, so I don't know. So they didn't work very well together, I guess. But he was very much, I don't know if you have Patton and Bradley, maybe Montgomery was a mix of the two. I'm not sure if that's a fair assessment. But
again, you come back to Patton. But Monty and Patton, they almost set each other up to be similar. They're competitive. They think, but they're both sort of aggressive in different ways about things. Yet Bradley seems to get on with Patton in some way or other. But I just wondered, if there was that anti-English British streak, or if it was just...
Yeah, I don't know. And from Omar's perspective, it was anti-British. I mean, again, based on his writings, which were years later, so you have to take them for what they're worth as well. From my research, it doesn't seem like he was anti-British at all. He obviously wasn't very happy with the way Monty portrayed him to the British public and all of that. I think I call it Monty's revenge in the book there. But
well, yes, that comes back to Monty's dull, conscientious, dependable and loyal. Yeah. Do you think that command found him, or do you think he steered himself into it?
I would say more the limelight found him in terms of being a more of a celebrity general. I think he was a leader from the early days. I do. I think just he developed it as time went on. I personally believe he was a phenomenal leader. In fact, I put an addendum in my book about his leadership style and how we can kind of replicate it today, because I think we can learn a lot. Very practical, hands-on advice. But
and what was his leadership style?
I guess I divided it down to 10 attributes that he had. Bravery, patience, perseverance was one. Putting the right people in the right places, delegation, self-confidence, leading by example, energy and ability, resolve, character, experience, and then luck. He said you need luck and all that. And there's a story that goes with each of them, but I think those are timeless myself of a leader. And certainly he knew how to develop leaders because he was so successful, as you mentioned, in the OTC program.
After Sicily, he was given command of the US First Army on D-Day and eventually the 12th Army Group. At his peak, he had 1.7 million men under his command. He was at the pinnacle of a huge organisation.
Yes, I mean, it always gets me when people say Omar Bradley wasn't a good leader. He very clearly was a good leader to even have any ability to do that. But yeah, I mean, he gave examples of each of those was kind of his, because he also was the head of the kind of part of the MGM. I don't know if you know that, his movie career. He helped oversee that.
What did he do for his? I know nothing about his movie career.
Yeah, so he was. I'm trying to think of what his official title was.
Well, at MGM, the studios.
Yes, yeah, MGM. He was on their board, actually, which brought him into close contact with many movie stars and celebrities.
This is post his military career?
Yes, post-military career. I'm trying to think of what things he did. He had a bit of an incident with Marlon Brando when they were filming Mutiny on the Bounty. Marlon Brando didn't approve of the script. They lost a lot of money while they were paying for the actors until he did approve it. He also worked for RKO, a rival company that would offer him payment, but he would never accept it. So they would send him like golf clubs and souvenirs and things like that. He was good friends with Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and John Wayne, believe it or not.
And that's interesting again because these are high-profile roles.
Absolutely.
It flies in the face of him being, going back to the Montgomery quote, dull or a quiet man. He avoids the press. Well, if you're working for these big companies, you're not avoiding the press. Is it in fact that he was a team player and kept his head down and let Eisenhower take the glory during the war because he was such a good team player? I wonder.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of that was that. I mean, he wasn't seeking it, but I also think he was a very astute leader. I mean, he knew what had to happen. He led Bulova, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, the watch company. That was a big part. They had a war contract with NASA where they would make the timers on the spaceships that were sent out. So that's a high-profile job as well. He was the CEO of a major company. He was on their board long after. So I mean, he was definitely a leader. It astounds me. There's kind of like pro-Bradley and anti-Bradley campaigns out there today. I'm sure you've come across them. Some people are convinced that Bradley was an oaf that just worked his way, that was just the luckiest guy in the world, had no ability. And then there's the pro-Bradley, which I believe see Bradley for who he is, a great leader. I mean, he was a human, though, very much. But
if he's making budgetary decisions at MGM or and a CEO of a company, they're not just board positions where you're the celebrity on the board to say that you've got the celebrity on the board. They're actually managerial positions. He
would hire and fire actors, according to his report.
Which again is not something you would expect.
Yeah, can you imagine a World War II general doing that? It's kind of very eclectic.
I wonder if he did it in the same manner that he fired his generals.
Can you imagine?
I can't help but read about Bradley and think about Patton, the movie. And I hadn't realised when I started brushing up that Bradley was an advisor on Patton, the film, which made me wonder how much is the film actually a look at Bradley than it is about Patton, because the Bradley character actually is right there at the forefront of the film.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think that. I mean, he went on location with Kitty, as you know, I'm sure, to kind of film that and be a consultant on it is what I think was his official title. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you have to watch that film with a grain of salt as well. seeing it for what it is. I think actually he's credited as the senior military advisor. I wanted to look and get that exactly.
That's it's a great badge to have on the credits, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, obviously Patton is a whole nother subject and a whole nother topic, but it's curious to know what level Bradley put himself into that character as well. I mean, who are we seeing? We're seeing, I mean, even the greatest leader only has their own perspective. So, I mean, obviously Bradley's coming with his own perspective, and anyone's perspective is limited. So that's not meant as a pass for Bradley, but, you can only bring what you see and experience yourself in terms of that. So, yeah, it's interesting.
After the war, he became Chief of Staff for the Army, and then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Again, I think it all points to that. Omar Bradley was a very capable leader. Recently, one of his aides wrote a book, George H. Whipple III, and it's really interesting. It's self-published, but it gives a different perspective of Omar Bradley, kind of during his time as the Chief of Staff. He kind of worked for him and as one of his drivers, and just kind of gives an insight into his life and things that he did. He would see people stranded on the side of the road, and he would pick them up in his big old car. Just kind of an everyday kind of guy. I mean, he didn't let it get to his head, and maybe that's one of the reasons why he's forgotten, is that he doesn't self-promote, but yet he kept rising to positions where the media was interested in him and his life. So again, it was kind of that conflict all throughout his life. Because I started off with this journal of his mistress. So I didn't have a very high opinion of him beginning my research. But as time went on and as I looked at things, I was really, I was almost biased at the beginning. But after doing this, I really have a whole new respect for Omar Bradley and the sacrifice he made for our country. And
why do you think he's been overlooked in favor of his contemporaries?
Yeah, and that's interesting. So I don't think he liked the limelight. I don't know if he, there could have very well been kind of two different sides to him, like I think everybody has in them. There's this side you're conditioned to have, and then there's kind of the disciplined side. And I mean, he obviously struggled because he was married and he had a mistress. So I mean, he had these two lifestyles, if you want to think of it like that, two, not personalities, but two sides of his life. So one of them didn't want to be promoted, self-promoting, but another was a strong leader that rose to the top wherever he was placed. So, I mean, it's almost kind of contradictory. If you're a strong leader and you rise to the top, the media is going to want to naturally know about you. So it's kind of, like you were saying, it's more than a coincidence. All these major positions he had and leadership jobs. So
it is a great story, isn't it? I say, there's him, sort of Eisenhower, who went, slightly higher because he obviously got president.
Yeah.
But they are a magnificent story of meritocracy in action. He came from nothing particular. There was no privilege in his background, and he slowly plodded his way up. And he plodded his way up when the army was small. There was no wars to distinguish himself. He sat and worked the treadmill and slowly, got himself seen. And then when the call came, he stepped forward and he performed. And there was a lot of people who didn't perform, and there was a lot of people who were fired, and there was a lot of people who thought they would be fantastic, and they turned out to be a shambles. And the responsibility on his shoulders, and for that matter, again, Eisenhower, even greater, but the responsibility on their shoulders was incredible, and they endured. Bradley was a professional soldier, but when times he came up to scratch, he did his bit, and he'd spend a long time not doing, in many respects, not doing a lot for 20 years in the interwar years. And it must have been hard in a small military,
Absolutely, and I think you kind of hit it when you said, I mean, his life is the American dream that goes around. You hear that in a different contexts. He worked hard, like you said. He worked his way up. It was hard work. He worked through it, and through ingenuity, through leadership, and through some lucky circumstances. Absolutely, he excelled, and I think that's I think that's what's so relatable about his story is he typifies the American dream.
Jeffrey, that seems like a good place to leave things. Thank you for talking to me. Jeffrey's book is The Private Life of General Omar N. Bradley, published by Macfarlane & Co. I've put a link on the website, www.podcast.com. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can contact me via the website or on Facebook. I'm Angus Wallace, and thanks for listening.